Warning, the podcast you're about to listen to may contain graphic descriptions of violent assaults, murder, and adult language. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to the Murder Police Podcast, The Murder of Umi Southworth, Part 5.
We're now looking at June of 2011. We're a year out from the original date of the homicide.
Almost exactly the day.
Yeah. And it's decided that we're going to go. This is about as good as it gets at this point, right? That's where we're at.
Let's present it to the grand jury and lay out all these facts that we've just done in these last couple hours and let them make a determination.
And what's a grand jury do? Let's educate the audience on that, because what is a grand jury and what's a row?
A grand jury is just 12 citizens, 12 to 14 citizens that come into the court. They get sworn in and they hear several cases that the police present to them that is there probable cause to go forward in a felony hearing or a felony trial to prosecute these individuals. They're allowed to ask questions during the grand jury. Commonwealth will ask the detective who testifies in front of the grand jury. They'll ask them questions, and the detective will answer those questions. And if any of the grand jury members have questions, they're allowed to ask. It is a private, sealed testimony. And then the grand jury, the detective leaves. The grand jury votes without the detective in there on whether there is probable cause to move forward for the felony trial.
Yeah. And just like Schoon said, so we have grand jury almost to the date of the homicide, which is June 1st, 2011, and it's a sealed indictment. So what that means is we're going to go into the grand jury. I'm going to testify as the lead, and the indictment is sealed, meaning that if they decide to indict, then that is not information let out to the public. Okay, so it was the first time I've ever testified. I testified for 8 hours in that hearing. We utilized a PowerPoint to provide all the information that we've kind of went through, a lot more information that we probably haven't even touched on. And after that testimony, it was within minutes that the grand jury came back with an indictment wanting to charge Donald Southworth with murder. And that's what we were looking to charge him with.
So let's give them a timeline of what we feel happened before we go and arrest. What you presented to the grand jury of the timeline. What we feel happened to Umi the night of her murder.
Okay. So what we had put together is this, is we believe that we know that Umi was going to take her oldest daughter, who was a very well-respected musician here in Lexington, and in fact had signed some contracts with a record company out of Nashville. Umi was leaving her job the day she was killed was supposed to be the last day she was to work at Fazoli's. And she was going to take her daughter. They already had an apartment set up in Nashville. They were going to move there. And basically, she was going to take the golden egg away from Donald, which was his money. He was always looked at as when she did perform here in Lexington or other locations, he was always setting up the equipment and trying to be her best friend, but also telling her what to wear. She looks better in glasses versus no glasses. He was very controlling of her as well. What we thought had happened was the night of the homicide, he was supposed to go to work report to work at 3:15. We know she got off the phone around 1:15 or so with the individual that he had stated that she was cheating with. They were in the same bed along with the oldest daughter. We believe from putting all the information together that somehow she was led outside, because it was our understanding that anytime she went outside, she always had that house coat on, and along with some shoes. She never stepped outside without the flip-flops or the shoes.
Which is where the cat comes in, because she loved her cat.
She loved the cat. The cat was basically their other child, is what they referred to it as. It would always go in the van. It would always travel with them, whatever. So we believe that she was lured outside. And I say that based on not just us guessing, but if you recall from the very first interview we had with Donald, he mentioned maybe she went out looking for the cat. We believe that the door that he let the cat out, she went out to look for the cat. He went outside. He struck her with a small hammer, causing her to go unconscious. He then drug her back to the tree line. Once in the tree line, she was still unconscious, pulled her clothing from her, and then she regained consciousness. And the only other item he had back there to assault her with was this log. He then struck her several times, creating the blunt force trauma to her head. And at that time, he, who thought this is what a crime scene looks like, took her clothing and staged it, or what I referred to it in the trial as arranged it, there at the scene. We believe maybe after that time had passed to where he was running late for work, that's why they started calling. He demands to go back to work. The water hose may have come into play with him washing himself or washing off some type of item. If you recall the items in the trash bag, he's now hurrying, trying to place those items and discard them. He's doing all this in a rush. It's raining, pouring the rain, which affected some of our evidence collection. And we believe, this is my testimony to grand jury, that after he took those items to make it look like it was a robbery and a sexual assault and a murder, placed those items in the bushes in hopes to return back from work to reclaim those items, to discard of those items. So,
But the Fazoli ladies,
yeah, kind of through that.
he didn't expect them to be at the house when he got home from work.
Yeah.
Let me point something out, too. Everything that you just talked about in that theory was supported by fact.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a big misconception right now, especially in some documentaries on things like Netflix. Everybody thinks just that theory can run on itself. We're not allowed to do that. Prosecutors aren't allowed to do that. We don't get to develop theories out of thin air. So that's the result of a lot of good work for over a year to be able to come and say that this is likely what happened, not just some shot in the dark. And I just want to point that out because right now there's a lot of things out there that people think if I've got a theory, I've got facts. And what's the thing we always used to say? Your facts have to fit your theories, and your theories have to fit your facts. Facts. That's just the way that works.
So once that information, did I leave anything out, Schoon, you think? So after that evidence was provided to the grand jury, that was our theory. And like Dave said, it was provided by facts. It was based on some statements made by Donald at the beginning of the interview. And I think this is a very important time to mention that what Schoon picked up on, which was huge, was that when he had stated that, well, my other neighbor's gay, he wouldn't have done this because it was portrayed to us to look like a sexual assault and a murder. So there's an indication there that he knew that she was lying out there naked and appeared to be sexually assaulted and have foreign DNA inside of her. Once all that information was provided to the grand jury, and again, I went through it in like 5 minutes, but that was 8 hours of testimony, they decided to indict Donald for murder.
So that very day, we did not know this. So once the indictment came over, we had researched where he was staying based on police reports. He had been pulled over for living in his car or his van at the time and certain things. So we knew he was at a certain location. So we got Dave and a few other detectives, and we went over to arrest Donald. But lo and behold, the very next morning, we found out that Donald had filed a lawsuit against the police department in the city of Lexington over Umi Southworth still being alive.
And we didn't know that when we went to go arrest him. It was news to us.
So the timing could not have been worse.
Yeah.
Did he advise you of the lawsuit when you went to pick him up? Is that how you found out? Or?
No, we found out in the morning in the news.
What was his demeanor when you went to get him? Because he had had some dealings with you all the year prior in that interview room. So was it just kind of, we're back?
I don't think he's intimidated by any of us. He just said, okay. We collected the things in his room where we located him, and he went to the police department with us.
So you feel like you still had a rapport with him?
No, I think after the telephone calls with Bill, he figured out that, okay, maybe they're a little sharper than he estimated. And I think he knew it was coming. That's my own opinion after seeing the expression on his face and how willing he was just to. No, he wasn't going to provide any information because he already found out that, well, maybe they're a little smarter than I thought, and I'm not going to deal with this.
I think that was the first time I saw on his face that he almost felt a little defeated, because I think he thought it could happen, but I think only until the day we knocked on that door of the hotel or the motel, I think it was finally he figured out that these guys know a little bit more than what I thought they would.
And they didn't give up.
Yeah, because a narcissist always counts on that bubble not ever breaking. And they usually, that's why I asked if you have a report, because they'll switch. The 180 goes off and now they're mad because you're on to them.
And it had been a year, and he doesn't know everything that Bill and Schoon and all the traveling they've done and the thousands of interviews that we've compressed down into this 3 hours that they've done. And he just thinks we kind of forgot about it. And the reality is we never forget about it. I mean, we're working those cases day in and day out every day.
Well, I think that's a very good point that Dave brings up is families may think we forget about those victims, but we don't ever forget about those victims. We are always trying to work those cases as much as we can. And sometimes we just can't go any further until some other lead comes in. But in this case, Donald hadn't contacted me any further beyond those earlier phone calls about where we were on the case. Like Dave said, he almost thought that maybe we had just forgotten about it and put it to the side, but we kept working it and finally got to this point.
Well, can I add to that? Any homicide detective that really is a homicide detective, I don't want the listeners to think, even though they don't know we go home at night and not talk about their loved one or someone that they know has been murdered. We absolutely wake up in the morning when we're getting ready for work. It bothers us. We know we got to get in there. We're responsible. And I don't think the victim's family realize that it's not a pride game. It's something and that's why when we go to trial, we're so nervous and we don't want to blow this in front of the family because they're depending on us. So it does affect us every day.
I'll jump in and say that if we're awake, we're thinking about it. And I know that
I would say if you're asleep, you're thinking about it because you wake up and you think, oh, I got to do this, this, and this in the morning. And then you can't even go back to sleep because you just are thinking about all that stuff. I mean,
I can still remember cases that I never was technically on the clock, and I had the murder book at home and I was making notes. And that's the love of this. It's a good point is that it just doesn't stop. And that's the dedication people have to this. So that's good for the family members to know, I think.
Well, I think I also want to add just at this table alone, just with the four of us, we're old school homicide, and that's how we always will be. And I know that even though you're retired, Dave, and we're all looking at retirement, we all still think about those cases and what we may have been able to do differently to try to solve those cases. Because like Schoon and Dave and everyone agrees that the family depends on us, and if we can't do it, then it's not going to go anywhere.
Very true. Very true.
So what did his conviction end up being?
That we're not done. We just made the arrest.
Yeah.
Right? So there is, and anybody that it's a TV commercial, anybody that thinks that our job gets easier after you make the arrest has no knowledge of law enforcement. Let me tell you this. It's where the real work begins because you're meeting with the Commonwealth meeting after meeting after meeting because what we need for probable cause is totally different what they need for conviction. So now, Bill, myself, Dave, half of the unit, we were out getting documents, telephone records, reviewing telephone records, calling experts about the telephone records. We're also, the behavioral science unit, we're asking for reports for them because what better testimony to have than the behavioral science unit? And unfortunately, a lot of people don't know this, but it's not an exact science. And the behavioral science unit has to meet the DABR qualifications, which means they have to be able to say, scientifically, this is the way people behave, and they can't do that. So therefore, they can't testify. So that's one hurdle we had. The other hurdle we had is to how to explain that Umi was still alive. After that, the other hurdle was, why didn't we find any DNA in the washer and dryer, right? Because a 12-year-old would have washed those clothes.
Or even the belt.
Or the
that
belt.
was around her neck.
Or
Right.
the log that
Or
was
the
in the
log.
rain.
I know.
Just
right?
no good DNA.
Let me go back to the belt. At the autopsy, was there any sign of any impressions or constriction or anything?
No, so at the time, it would appear that that was used for some type of strangulation or some type of injury to the neck area. But come to find out, as we kept investigating and started to see that maybe this was all staged, I testified that that belt was actually just placed around her neck for a prop.
Yeah,
but
but
there
it
was
would have
no
left
injury.
There would have been some artifacts.
That's correct. There was no injury to her neck to show that the belt was used for anything else other than just around her neck.
Which is another
Part
deflection,
of this. Mhm.
right? It's perfect. It's perfect. And then if a good prosecutor, which they did, would say, why would he say the guy upstairs gay, he wouldn't hurt her when you see a belt, a naked woman? And how would he know that the gay guy wouldn't hurt her?
And to follow up with what Schoon was saying about the issues we were going to probably have in trial, these are things we're trying to work towards to make sure we can have them have an answer for. Why was there no force? The sexual assault? How was the semen inserted? These were questions that we knew we had to answer in the trial, and having a good answer so the jury would believe us. Also, we needed to know and be able to explain his relationships with these other women.
Yeah. And you know what? Just to clarify, too, because some people might be thinking it, it's important, too, on the sexual assault part about evidence of injury and force, because what he's alleging or trying to portray out there is kind of a strange or violent sexual assault. We know that people in relationships, even married people, can still have, you can still rape somebody under a different context, but it's important to show that there wasn't any force, because he's the one that actually created that possibility or that theory, as he developed that. So just to point that out, that yes, inside of a relationship, there are such things as sexual assaults, and they may not produce that kind of an injury, but he's the one that made this whole theory up there that this is a violent sexual assault.
In preparing for trial, and they had asked for a speedy trial on this, which would limit us to the amount of time we had to prepare for the trial. So I believe we went to trial within 6 months. Is that what you recall, Schoon?
It was
pretty quick.
Quickly.
A lot quicker than normal.
Yeah, that's a land speed record.
Yeah, so because of the request for the speedy trial, and just so the listeners know, typically a homicide case, if it's not requested for the speedy trial, then usually we don't go to trial for a number of years, at the least of 2. This went to trial rather quickly, which was a strategy by the defense, I will say. And it was a very good strategy to try to push us quickly to trial, to not have as much information in hopes to prosecuting their client. So in our review of what we had with the case, we had interviewed over 200 witnesses. We had 66 witnesses we subpoenaed to trial that actually testified. There was at least 63 pieces of evidence, and there was over 30 pieces of DNA evidence that we provided as well in this trial, which is huge. I mean, that Dave, you've been...
That's a gigantic witness. Now, I've seen a lot of people sit out in the hall for weeks and never get called, but I've never seen them actually go up. That's
Other than this case, I only have one other complex case that I've worked, and in that case, we provided 50,000 pages of discovery. So, I mean, there's a lot of complex cases out there, but this is definitely one of the most complex cases.
And let me
we've
bet,
worked.
with the 50,000, they didn't ask for the speedy trial, did they?
No, they have not.
No, that's a slow reader group.
And
Yes, it is.
it's a great thing to have, actually. We're going to slow you down. We're going to give you banker boxes.
And actually, that would be a good case for you to hear eventually.
Yeah, we should
Once
think
it's
about.
adjudicated.
Yeah, we'll wait on that one then.
So, hey, Bill, let's talk about, since you're talking about the trial, let's talk about, there was one point that we had to panic. We pushed the panic button, like the Best Buy button there. So talk about the defense calling their expert.
Well, that is a good point, but let me back up and I recall that, and I think you can explain it better, but also let me explain to the audience that how the defense believed I was going to answer.
Oh, yeah, sure.
I think that's important in this case. So in this case, I was on the stand. Thank you.
How old are you? It's getting dark.
Yeah. It's past my bedtime. There's no doubt about that. So I was on the stand, and I think I took the stand for 3 days on this case. But the defense expected a specific answer from me that I believe was going to help their client, and I obviously didn't answer the way they thought I would. So what I mean by that is defense had asked me, when you arrived at the scene and you were the lead, is that correct? Yes, I was. When you observed the scene where Umi was found, did it appear that it was a homeless camp? Because I knew where they were going with that. They wanted me to talk about, yes, it was. They wanted to provide reasonable doubt to the jury that obviously if this is a homeless camp, there could have been a homeless individual that has done this. So I responded no, and I think the defense was taken back by that and asked me why, to explain my answer to that. And I explained that, as Dave had talked about early on when we were talking about this, there were things, we've responded to scenes like that of a homeless camp, and it was not what I've seen in a homeless camp. There was no numerous cigarette butts. There was no beer cans. There was no liquor bottles. There was no fire pit. There was nothing of that.
Places to hang your clothes. We discovered that's a common denominator in a homeless camp. They at least have a line or a branch where everybody hangs their clothes to dry out.
Yeah,
there was none of that.
And usually a 5-gallon pickle bucket for a full of poop.
Yeah.
So thanks for adding that in there.
So the defense, I think, was taken back by that, and I thrive on testifying. Like I love that. Other than interviewing suspects in the box, I thrive on being on the stand. So what we decided to do. So as I answered that question, I then went into we all as homicide detectives see when the door's open, right? In explaining something on the stand. And what I mean by that to the audience is, if the defense asks something and allows me some time to come back with a better answer or some explanation, then I'm going to take that time and do it. So in this case, that's exactly what I did. So when they were taken back by my answer of, no, it didn't look like a homeless camp, this is why, there was some silence, and then I went right into, this is what I believe to be an arranged scene. And because we'd already had some hearings before to where I wasn't able to use the word staging, so I used the word arranged. And by that, I got in that the scene appeared to be arranged. And what I meant by that was the items were thrown around like they were placed there versus just a homeless camp would look. The clothing wasn't torn for the sexual assault. The trash bags that were out there with the clothing that was in it were actually similar to the trash bags that were inside his residence. And that this was a scene that I believe Donald Southworth set up. And before defense knew I had gotten all that in, the jury was looking at me like, we believe this is what happened.
I was going to say, when did they object? At some point, that's a runaway train. I mean,
after that, I was instructed to only answer the questions that I'm asked.
Good for you.
So, but we all know this at the table. That's what you've got to do to get that in.
Right. If they open the door, they open the door.
Yeah. Follow up with, and we don't have Ray here tonight, but Ray did an excellent job in closing, and he had me there they let him and Luana laid out the trash bags. We were able to show that they were all similar. They fit on top of each other. They were the exact same size. And so they laid out all this physical evidence, and they did an excellent job in closing. And I'm sure the listeners are familiar with Ray Larson and Luana. They were able to basically tell the story so the jury believed it. They then, after hearing the story, then decided to basically find him guilty.
Right. The jury went in, and it was a very short time that they came back. Let's go back to the defense expert.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry.
Don't apologize. You're sweet. So there was a panic moment where the defense had hired an expert from out of state to come in and explain why the Lexington Police Department didn't understand that this was a violent crime scene and what we missed and whatnot. So Luana was awesome, and her spouse was awesome.
And that's Luana Redcorn.
Right. Yes. They came out and said, let's, real quick, before we got a recess, before we come back after lunch, we need to know everything we can about this expert. Well, come to find out, his history was not so great. So after lunch, Luana approached the bench and said, if you're calling him to the stand, we're going to address these issues that he's had in the past. Do you want to do that? The defense decided not to use him as an expert witness, and it was a successful win after that. So it was, I mean, my point is you're working on this case up until the jury deliberates. Mm-hmm. It's to that point where it gets harder as the trial goes on until the jury deliberates. It's not done.
That's good research on the Commonwealth's part, too, to look into that history of that person, because we all know that some people can get qualified as an expert, and there's a process for that. But it doesn't mean that they've always been looked at carefully, and what if their track record isn't that good? Because in the end, this is what they'll get accused of anyway, is how much did they pay for you to come up here and say that?
Right.
So that's great research on the Commonwealth's part. And let me add, too, that with Ray Larson, too, is that I don't think anybody closes as strong as Ray. I mean, it's fire and brimstone. He's a prosecutor's prosecutor. So I've seen that myself, and it's very powerful to watch.
Yes, he is. So to give the audience an idea, this was a trial that lasted 10 days. Closing arguments lasted 4 hours. And the jury deliberated for 3.5 hours. And then they came back with a guilty plea, or a guilty for Donald Southworth, for the murder of Umi Southworth.
Good deal. And then they moved on to the sentencing phase, I guess? Or
they did.
Yeah. What did they come up with on that one?
No, life.
Oh, it was life. That's correct. Yeah, life, imprisonment.
But there was an appeal.
Yeah, there was an appeal. And in any murder trial, there's always an appeal. And it was granted this time because of some issues we had of information that was provided in trial.
The testimony of the second wife
Yeah.
was prejudice to the jury, so they felt that they should retry the case.
Yeah, and that's one thing that listeners don't understand. Sometimes when they see a successful appeal, as a lot of people, I think, look at it and say, well, they screwed that up. And we know that this whole process is a minefield. When you're testifying, it's a minefield. You all have done Bruton arguments before, probably, where, you can't use the testimony of a co-defendant, and that whole thing in Miranda where everything you say can and will be used against you, that's a crock. That's not true, because if I get up there and just slip up and say, well, how did you arrest Chris Schoonover? And I said, well, he had a warrant for misdemeanor theft. Boom. The gavel goes down, the whole thing starts again. So It's important to understand that that's the protection that the system offers, but it always doesn't mean that it's been bad work or anything.
And even though that the second wife testified to what she had experienced, that was deemed to be not admissible. And, for us, that was everything. That was a good part of the case. And for them to rule against that.
Yeah, it's all timing, right? I mean, because there's things that you can't do during trial that you can bring up during sentencing, and it's a minefield right there.
Yeah, let me also add that the judge in this case, I won't say who that was, but did an excellent job, because she knew that this could happen, and she knew how much information was coming into this trial, and she was very cautious of what she was going to allow into the trial, knowing that there was going to be an appeal, and there could be a possibility of a reversal. So we had a lot of hearings.
I'm going to add to that. Yes, at first we were frustrated, saying, "Why is this happening? Is she not allowing this in?" And after thinking about it, and after all said and done, she was preparing that there would be no appeals. She was on the money. She was on her game. I totally understood. Bill everybody understood, and she did great. But lo and behold, they found a loophole.
Yeah, and Schoon and I, and we all at this table consider her a friend, and there was some times on the stand where I was like, "We're friends. Why are you treating me like this?" I would look at her and like, "Are you really treating me like this?" I was put on the hot spot for a few times.
But that's a good judge, right?
Yes,
it is.
Right.
And if people want to have faith in the system, then sometimes that's a little bit of a rougher ride than not. But she's protecting the record.
That's correct.
And in the end, that's what we all want, is a protected record.
The issue came up and it's called a 404B. And what the Commonwealth goes through, a 404B is similar acts which cause this action of murder. In this case, it was a murder or domestic violence, which involved the second wife. The Supreme Court of Kentucky felt that the testimony by the second wife was prejudicial to the jury, which ultimately convicted the defendant. So they won that appeal. So in the meantime, that means that the Lexington Police Department, i.e. Bill, me, Dave, that means we get to investigate further. So we pull the books back out. We get to investigate what the defense attacked in the trial. So that's our advantage, as well as it's their advantage that they won the appeal. So we get back to work on, okay, so if they felt that the second wife's testimony prejudiced the jury, we can't use her again. So we have to use something else to convince the jury that he committed this. Well, in the meantime, so we're searching more individuals for DNA, taking swabs, surreptitiously going over to other witnesses' houses and asking them, hey, can you provide this? If they don't, then, this is just an example of how we would collect DNA. If we knew that their habit was to go to a Mexican restaurant, have a margarita, some of the detectives may sit at the bar, wait for them to finish so we can testify that we actually saw them drink out of this straw. We would wait for them to leave. We'd collect that straw, send it, seal it, send it to the lab, and be able to follow the chain of custody so it would come back and confirm whether it was that DNA or not. While this was going on, there's other things simultaneously. Again, I'm sorry to be redundant, but simultaneously, the court, the legal system is running through hearings and objections of, okay, how are we going to approach this? What's the best approach? We need to have meetings. We have a hearing on suppression of evidence. And so eventually, Donald Southworth takes an Alfred plea.
And what is that? Describe that for the audience.
So what happens is they agree that there is enough evidence to take it to trial, but they're not going to admit to that evidence is enough to convict them. So what happens is they take the Alfred plea. The judge says, do you agree to this? And they have a whole diverse plethora of information that the defendant has to agree to. They read that in the courtroom for the record, and he agrees to that. So at the end of the appeal and the end of the Alfred plea, he agreed to 15 years, which he is released from prison at 2024.
That's not very much time, is it?
It's better than we have to consider the witnesses and their stability in their life and their mental stability. And I don't know if I had to do it all over again, if I would ask that second wife to come and testify. She was so brave in doing it the first time. And to criticize what she testified to say that prejudice, I don't know if I would do that again.
And all the other relationships, they didn't testify because we've talked about them, but they were so scared of Donald that they couldn't even come to testify. And put them through that again, it's too much for them.
And that's another good thing to talk about the judge too. She saw that there could be an issue with that testimony as well, so she didn't want the appeal to happen. So she was almost being very cautious of their testimony to be provided in the trial as well.
Those are important things to note because a lot of people, again, on the outside don't understand those decisions are made based on people's lives and where they are. And we did the murder of Trent DeGero on this show, and that was a decision on that one when it got appealed, is that Ray Larson, the Commonwealth attorney, had promised the primary witness in that she would only have to testify one time. Mm. And she was the foundational witness for that case. And when it went on appeal, is that he even agreed that he couldn't ask her to do that again. So those are the realities of what you're working with in the system. They're just there.
Right. And that's a great point. So you have to evaluate, is this going to change their life? Is it worth having these witnesses go through this emotional stress again? And I think it's a win-win situation. I think we did as best as we can with the obstacles that Don Southworth have placed in front of the detectives. I think it was an outstanding investigation, and I think the outcome is not what we'd like, but it's the best that we can do.
Absolutely.
I like to say this as well, as this is the individual we were dealing with, is the first wife that, with the kidnapping, their relationship began in 1983, just to give you some idea of how long this was going on. The kidnapping was in 1992. The physical and mental abuse was occurring that whole time. And then he was not investigated until the time he killed Umi in 2010. So to give you some idea of how long he'd been basically victimizing these victims, it had been quite a while. So just to give the audience some idea of how long he had been at this.
Well, as we kind of round this out, then let's talk about domestic violence a little bit. And unfortunately, we've all worked cases that ended the wrong way for that. What were some of the things that this guy was doing that people could look for in behavior of other people? When we talk about the control factors, were there some individual little things he was doing along the way that you all found out in the investigation that if somebody else was in those shoes, they could watch for and say, hey, I may have a problem with this?
I think just to start with the most recent would be the Fazoli ladies. They were seeing an employee and a friend of theirs that sat by them side by side every day, having to report to an individual who was believed to be her husband and saying that she can't go to lunch with them because he's demanding she has to eat with him, and him picking her up and not having phone access. And these were small things that they were seeing that I think other individuals may be seeing currently with their friends or coworkers.
What can people do in a situation like that, guys?
In reality, in a perfect world, I would say there's plenty of hotlines that people could call.
1-800-799-SAFE for the domestic violence hotline. Just reach out to people. Reach out to your friends, family. Reach out to the hotline, and we want to help. The police want to help.
Well, and I think also it just takes a lot of courage from that victim, especially in the first couple that you mentioned that you all had to go search for. When someone is willing to just go hide and change their name and physically become sick when they think that their abuser has located them or sent someone to find them, that's powerful. And it takes a lot of courage to be able to stand up and tell your story when you've got that person at home maybe threatening you and you really don't know what their capabilities are or to what lengths they'll take to harm you if you do tell. So I can't imagine what shoes the victim must be in to think she has to stay or he has to stay or they will suffer the consequences of that. So I think definitely having the courage to get out and find a safe place, whether it's calling the number or confiding in a friend or going to a safe house. I know there's often safe houses for domestic violence victims, but understand that you don't have to take it. You don't have to be a victim.
And domestic violence isn't always physical abuse. It can be mental abuse, financial abuse, just controlling someone. And so if you feel that those are going on in your life, reach out and talk to someone and let's work through this and get you the help that we can provide.
Yeah, have faith in the system. I said it during the Amanda Ross episode, is that when we see those outliers, those extremes, when everything looks like it's in place but we have a result, is not to lose faith in it. Some people will say, well, a restraining order is just a piece of paper. And that's true in some extent, but it's in most cases, it works and it works well. And people need to remember that and to move toward that instead of away from it. So I'm with you, Dave, is that those resources are out there. You just got to keep punching away. And if you've got a friend that's going through this, you need to be extremely supportive with them. That's what they need. Not somebody to tell them what to do, but somebody to be there to hold their hand and encourage them and be there and offer those supports, especially if there's economic downfalls that come with this, like moving out or something, is that it takes people getting their arms around people to help them.
And that's what we discovered in this investigation was the individual that she was texting, she promised that person that she wouldn't stay the whole night with Donald before she left for Nashville. And they made her promise. And he, to this day, feels so bad. And and there's no recovering from that. But I, as a friend to an individual that's going through domestic violence, take the initiative. Just say, why don't you just stay with us? Go ahead and say your goodbyes. I'll come over and pick you up. Support them in any way you can. You don't have the answers, but let them know that you will be there no matter what time of night in this situation. 1 o'clock, that person would have been over there driving, pick them up, take them back to the house, say their goodbyes, and move on with their life.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much. Bill and Chris and Dave, you all have done a fabulous job helping us to see what kind of victim Umi was, and so horrible, her death. And my heart goes out to her family that she has, her daughter. But thank you all so much. It sounds like you worked tireless hours, put in so much effort for this, and we're grateful that you came to share your story.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. Thank you again.
Thank you so much.
The Murder Police podcast is hosted by Wendy and David Lyons and was created to honor the lives of crime victims so their names are never forgotten. It is produced, recorded, and edited by David Lyons. The Murder Police podcast can be found on your favorite Apple or Android podcast platform, as well as at murderpolicepodcast.com, which is our website, and it has show notes for imagery and audio and video files related to the cases you're going to hear. We are also on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Pinterest, LinkedIn, and YouTube, which has closed caption available for those that are hearing impaired. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe for more and give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcast or wherever you download your podcast from. Subscribe to the Murder Police Podcast and set your player to automatically download new episodes so you get the new ones as soon as they drop. And please tell your friends. Lock it down, Judy.